Hello, this is Robert Rickover at Body Learning, and today my guest is Imogen Ragone, who's an Alexander Technique teacher and website designer in Wilmington, Delaware. And in this podcast, Imogen's going to actually interview me on the topic, the power of doing almost nothing. Imogen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. This sounds extremely interesting and thought-provoking.
Well,
Yeah, so explain what you mean by doing almost nothing.
and I'm thinking initially in terms of using Alexander directions.
Mm.
Whatever kinds of directions you use doesn't really matter. That, in my experience, they are most effective if the softer they are or the lighter they are. And
So
but
when you say soft or light,
mhm.
can you explain what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, no attempt to concentrate on them or hold them tight in any way,
Hmm.
or um, any trying not to forget them,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, that's the sort of thing that I'm thinking of. And when I teach new students directions, I'll often say that of course the direction has to be a useful one to be
Hmm.
effective, but equally and maybe even more important is how that direction is delivered by you to you.
So sort of like the quality of it is just as important as the substance of it.
I believe that to be the
Yeah.
case,
Hmm.
and uh, I found that many students, when they start experimenting with directions, have an inclination to concentrate on them or hold
Hmm.
them or keep them going in a kind of a forceful mental way. And what I found is that when I can get them to take a much more, almost you might say, a more relaxed attitude towards using them. That is,
Hmm.
carve out little periods of time for experimenting, and these I typically have them carve out quite short periods, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, or even shorter sometimes,
Hmm.
and experiment with using a direction in the course of doing an activity, and then perhaps experiment with throwing it away and then bringing it back. And when they are in the mode of using the directions, I tell them ahead of time it's a given that you're going to forget them pretty quickly.
Hmm.
And when you notice you've forgotten them, you just gently bring it back again. And I'll have little exercises I do to kind of encourage that. And most students are pretty good at that if they're given, if in some ways it's kind of a relief, I think, for people because it means you don't have to try so hard.
Hmm.
And it fits in very well with the idea, sort of a related idea, that the the state of being freer, let's say you're using a freedom direction like I'm free or my neck is free, the state of being freer is there always, potentially, and it's just a question of choosing it. It's not,
Hmm.
and there's no effort in that any more than there's effort in turning on the lights or some simple activity. You just make that decision, but you don't hang on to it. You just bring it to bear, and then you may notice that you've forgotten it. You just bring it back again. That's kind of what I mean by light,
Hmm.
and the reason why I think it's so important, at least in the West and maybe in other parts of the world, I think we tend to have that kind of light background to thoughts that are very general, like, oh, what a nice day it is today. But
Mm.
when we get specific, my neck, or this activity that I'm doing right this second, we tend to, in a way, kind of narrow our focus and add a little oomph to it, a little mental and naturally then physical tension to it.
Yeah, and it just occurred to me as you're speaking, I think there's also a tendency in our culture, if something is good for us or it seems to be working, then we kind of think more is better.
Exactly,
And it's
exactly. And I
very
don't think,
often not the case, or certainly not in this instance, but
no,
maybe
and
in quite a lot of instances as well.
well, I think that that idea that more is not necessarily better, but in fact may be worse in a sense, is true of a lot of fields. A few that I'm familiar with, and I'm not an expert in any of these, but my original thought was this is kind of a homeopathic
Huh.
approach to directing. Now, for our listeners who are not familiar with homeopathy, it's not on everyone's lips these days. I think perhaps more in England than in North America. It is a kind of a medical system that's quite different from the standard one, and there are devotees for sure. And it's based on whatever the appropriate medicine, as it were, that you're going to get, or the material that you're going to ingest as part of the process, that it's typically diluted, and it can be diluted various amounts. And in that system, as I understand it, the more you dilute it, the more powerful it is. And even to the point where there's nothing left that you could identify as the material, kind of the trace of the material. So, I mean, that's an interesting example. It's a very different idea than, say, Western medicine, where I don't think that idea would hold particularly. But there it is. Less is definitely, in their view, more powerful in terms of the intervention.
So
Uh,
I'm just thinking off the top of my head, and I'm going to be sort of devil's advocate now.
go for it.
Going back to Alexander technique and directing.
Hmm.
Would it be possible to go so light that you're really not even?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
And what I say is the softer you can entertain that direction without it being totally lost.
right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
and
Okay.
I have little exercises to play with that, so that yeah, it's not magic. It isn't like you think about it and then I don't know somehow dilute it in vast amounts so that
Hmm.
you don't even know what it is anymore. No, I mean when you are thinking the thought, the directions
Very
are
conscious.
they're
Yeah.
very definite. They're
Hmm.
not the directions themselves are not at all wishy-washy or vague. They're very specific, but it's the delivery mechanism that
Yeah.
I'm talking about.
Hmm.
So another example, it's actually kind of similar to homeopathy, and I do have a lot more experience with, is meditation. At least the kind of meditation that I've been exposed to, which I guess is essentially Hindu meditation.
Okay.
I was introduced to it through transcendental meditation. I don't use that anymore, but I use something that has the same basic idea, which is you're given a mantra and you repeat it, and you are told very emphatically that you're not to hang on to it or try to hold it or anything like that. It'll disappear, and then you may even go to sleep, in fact, in that system, and then you might then notice that you've forgotten the mantra and you just bring it back again. So there's no
Huh.
grasping, there's no holding or grasping. And in fact, I remember when I was in my TM days, the Maharishi told a little joke once on one of his videos about some guy who started meditating, had these wonderful results, and said, "Wow, I think if a little bit of that's doing so well, why don't I up the effort a little more, and get
Hmm.
better results?" And then, of course, he didn't. So So that's certainly an example. It's very close to the Alexander technique in some ways, how you
Hmm.
use your thinking process. And then
Yeah.
another area where I believe this holds is in the martial arts. I can remember seeing a video that was made some time ago by some famous Tai Chi masters. Anyone who knows Tai Chi may know about this video. And this old little guy um, asking all his top students to come at him one after the other, or
Hmm.
even together. And it's just astonishing because they all get flung backwards against the wall. And it's an incredible thing to see. And I think that it is generally true in the martial arts that you're after. Um, it's how you're organizing yourself to deal with, say, an attack. Not to fight it head on, but to maybe even give a little bit and then go
Hmm.
for the kill or whatever, whatever it is. And this is an area I don't know a whole lot about, but I think that principle holds true in that field. And there are lots of other examples.
I'm wondering if this is related when you see an athlete who's just really in the zone on form and they just seem to be doing these amazing things with a just effortless ease, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and of course, it isn't exactly easy. They've got a lot of skill behind it, but in the moment, they're not over efforting. They're not. Is that? I think
Yeah,
that's related to the martial arts.
right. They
Exactly.
are they if they're an athlete, they are certainly creating effort to,
Yeah, but
but
in the
there's no
traditional
unnecessary
yeah,
effort.
and of course that's very related to Alexander as well. So
Sure. I think if you look at the famous fight between, I think it's Muhammad Ali and can't think of who the other guy was, Sonny Liston maybe, a long time ago, where Muhammad Ali was fighting someone who's much stronger than him,
mhm,
much bigger and stronger, and he ultimately won by on the virtue of his because of his agility. He moved so quickly that his opponent couldn't really focus on him. And if you watch him in that fight, he's just floating around the ring
mhm,
with there's no extra effort there.
mhm.
There's no extra effort at all. Or even someone who kind of exemplifies Alexander principles, even though he never had any Alexander lessons. A guy like Fred Astaire,
Yeah, yeah,
looking at his movies, turn off the sound and just watch him and forget the dance scenes. Just look at him when he's walking and talking, and you see just nothing unnecessary there. There
right.
is the effort of walking or speaking, but there's absolutely nothing extra, as far as I can see with him.
So I mean, to me, this is like getting to non-doing.
Yeah, and
So
yeah.
it's almost like a non-doing approach to giving directions.
Well, let me read you a quote by the great man himself,
Okay.
F. Matthias Alexander. I've just pulled it up on my computer screen here. This is a direct quote. This is the principle of the whole work, that is the Alexander technique, not to do something but to think. We redirect our activity by means of thought alone. This principle is the hardest thing of all to grasp. People just don't see it. Yet we know that it works. It is demonstrable. And there are many other quotes by Alexander that kind of follow in that same line. In fact, one I just posted on Facebook today: "The less you do, the better off you will be." Is
Yeah,
is
I
a
mean, I think you
line.
have to understand the context of that quote.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he means. I think he
I
means.
understand what it
Yeah,
means. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, he emphasized that really what it's going to help you is the power of thought and not muscular doing, although
Yeah.
that will come,
But
as you
aren't you
do the
saying
activity.
also the power of the thought can be stronger or lighter or
Well,
more
I think so.
effortful or less effortful? And
Yeah, I don't
yeah,
think he ever thought about that as much. I don't know. I think he just wanted to get people away from excessive muscular activity and
well, if you think about it, if you're over focusing on that thought, you are using more muscular activity.
that's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So I think I'm not sure with Alexander, I have to say I'm not sure that I don't think verbal directions were his strong suit really. If you look at his directions, his original directions, say back in the 20s and 30s, they were kind of a mouthful, and I think people got pretty frustrated trying to project them. I think his strength was, using his hands, but that's kind of a topic for another day. So I'm not sure he was quite as in tune with the ideas that I'm talking about right now in terms of if you are going to use your thinking to change yourself, it's really important to use your thinking well. I guess is how I
right.
would put it.
As with everything else,
Yeah,
right?
and well, and
Yeah.
with thinking about yourself, changing yourself, I think well means soft or whatever the word you want to use that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, in a way, it's like really making sure you're only thinking. Because I think when we put effort into our thinking, it's when we're doing something as well as thinking. I'm just thinking
Right,
on the top
right.
of my head.
And that could
Because
be,
it comes when I start focusing on something, then I've got tension in my neck or I'm furrowing my brow. So there's something else going on as well as the thinking.
yeah, exactly. It might
Um,
be a very subtle something else,
yeah, right.
but it's a something that involves some tension, and pretty often with thinking, it involves tension in the head, neck, upper torso area, which of course we all know has a lot of importance in the
But
Alexander world.
yeah,
Could be furrowing your brows. It could
yeah.
be sort of tightening your eyes, that kind of thing.
And of course, as I'm thinking this through now, of course, we know that just thinking does have a physical effect,
Hmm.
even in the most positive sense. So
Yeah, I don't
you
think
can't
there's. I don't
ultimately
think.
separate it completely.
Oh,
So
absolutely
we
not.
don't want to,
I
yeah,
don't think there's. You can ever have any thought without there being a physical correlate of some
right.
kind. So it's not that light, effective, powerful, self-directing doesn't involve any physical
Manifestation.
manifestation, but the manifestation is going to be way, way softer than if you concentrate on it. And, you can just look at someone who you would look at, say, across the room at someone and you say to yourself, boy, he's really concentrating on that
Yeah,
project. And what tells you that is usually uh, manifestations of physical tension.
exactly.
I mean, if you
Yeah.
can, if you could say that by just looking at someone, boy, they're really concentrating on it, then it must be something visual at some level, and I would say, almost certainly muscular tension.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's basically the what I wanted to talk about today.
Okay,
Is that
great. No, that,
you're
yeah, no,
you're
that's
good with that?
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, um, my guest today, who interviewed me, is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher and website designer and a social media guru in
Wow.
Wilmington, Delaware. And I'll put a link to her site, my site, and a general site about the Alexander Technique by this interview. Hey, Imogen, thanks so much for this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.